We've had several major disturbances in the United States since we created the Constitution and became a country. But there is one civil war that was not a civil war. This deserves a good talk about.
Hello, anyone. I'm Scott Bame. They call me the old farmer. Most people think we only had one civil war. Actually, we've had several. Then there are things that are just disturbances, maybe a protest or whatever. The best example of that would be January 6th. That was just a protest. And I think that some people are blowing it way out of proportion for what it is. In fact, it's impossible to agree on what happened, let alone what it was. But it was just a protest. It wasn't insurrection. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was just a protest. And as soon as we can admit that, then it will take its proper place in history. The first Civil War was the Whiskey Rebellion from 1791 to 1794. Farmers quite often used whiskey for currency back in this time, and there was very little money to be had. The distillers that were doing whiskey protested in two ways. First, there shouldn't have been a tax on whiskey. And second, they should have been able to pay whatever taxes necessary with whiskey, because there wasn't any money out there. Physical, hold-in-your-hand money. There was trading, and that was most of what commerce was at the time. And George Washington sent in the troops, and it took a couple of years from 1791 to 1792, although I would say that date is wrong. I would say 1792 to 1794. Things were brewing at the time in 1791, but it hadn't broken out in violence until 1792. And that was in roughly the western Pennsylvania area of the United States, and maybe up into New Hampshire and such. Mostly the mountain area, think of it that way, of the Appalachians. Of course, there were a lot of rebellions, small things that were dust-ups, as I would call them, not actual civil wars. Also, what would be considered an uprising that only happened in one small area and lasted for maybe a day, those were protests. Maybe they got violent, but they were just protests. come up to April 12th, 1861 to May 9th, 1865. Often it's called the American Civil War, which it wasn't. Absolutely no way was it a civil war. We have to understand this. You may say there's different issues involved with the North and with the South, with the Confederate States. Different issues, and you may think one is more important than the other. I understand that. But it was not a civil war, and it should never be called a civil war. You could call it a war between the states, or you could call it the War of the Union and Confederate countries, but I think the most obvious one is the war between the states. That's my opinion. This is why it's not a civil war. Nothing was settled this way other than by force. The Constitution gives the option, especially at this time period. Well, the Confederate States left and formed their own country. They had elections, they had proper officials running the country, and they were recognized by other countries around the world. Abraham Lincoln said, no. I like to use the example, the Mexican-American War. That was a war between two countries. And what we have with Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis was a war between two legitimate countries. And I think part of the problem, not all of it, but there's still a little bit hanging in there, that nothing was decided other than by brute force. In other words, the laws hadn't really changed or anything. And the South still felt that they were treated unjustly. Now, I believe, and there'll be dispute out there by other people, I believe that if there wasn't a civil war, we would have seen the same actions as what we would have seen in England when slavery was abolished much earlier. But you can't change your economy if you're facing a war. The leaders of the Confederate States understood that slavery, at least economically, was not viable. There's an economic side of this, and there is a moral side of slavery. And I think the South was getting to the point where they were saying, and there's letters to prove it by the officials of the Confederate States, that they really wanted to eliminate slavery. So from my point of view, and there will be other people with different opinions, and not saying that they're wrong, but the way that I'm seeing it is that Abraham Lincoln did not want these states to leave. And this is what caused the war. And just because some states lost a war doesn't mean the issue really has gone away. And we're kind of seeing that quite often there is a secession portion of many states, Michigan included, seceding from the Union, because there's too many variances within the nation, such as in Michigan. It's kind of hard to understand what the heck's going on in California. It's just the way it is. Two different kinds of mindsets. And so there are many people who feel that we would do better if their particular state seceded from the Union. Now, this is where possibly Donald Trump can come in and make things better. If he can do what he's trying to do with the tariffs and bringing business and manufacturing back to the United States. If he succeeds, the country will be strong again.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. We are finally putting America first. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. More production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices. From this day on, we're not going to let anyone tell us that American workers and families cannot have the future that they deserve. We're going to produce the cars and ships, chips, airplanes, minerals, and medicines that we need right here in America. We're going to build our future with American hands, with American heart. This will be indeed the golden age of America.
I don't consider the war between the states as a civil war. I see it as two legitimate countries fighting one another. Where the second civil war that we had in the United States that I consider a civil war was the 1960s to the 1980s. And it could be called the race riots or Black Power movement. There was violence involved.
Not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
That's from the late 60s to the early 80s. Now, maybe the woke movement that we've been seeing lately, I really wouldn't call it a civil war. And because there wasn't a real united force behind the woke movement and all of the associated things, I just consider them a long-running protest by different independent groups, but not a civil war. So we have a couple of actual civil wars, the Whiskey Rebellion, and conversationally speaking, the race riots of the 60s. And then we have an internal two-country war between the Confederate States and the Union States. And that I call a war between the states, and it's not a civil war. It was like the War of 1812, when the United States tried to invade Canada and grab Quebec. And England came in and stopped it and burned down the capital. That was 1812 war. We, as a country, not the people, but the government, tried to invade Canada. And that's why if you're sitting in school with history, especially I was confused about it, I couldn't understand what was the cause of 1812 war. Why did England come through and burn down our capital? It wasn't explained in a proper way. Well, I'm explaining it to you. The United States tried to go in and grab a piece of Canada, and Canada fought back with the help of England, and that's how our federal Capitol building was burned down. Well, I hope this clarifies things a little bit about the differences between civil wars, uprisings, protests, and actual international war.
Thank you for watching, and please be safe. We'd sure appreciate it if you could subscribe and leave a comment. You know how YouTube behaves. They won't believe you watched a video unless you leave a comment. Also, it would help if you ring the bell and do a thumbs up. As you know, if I find a good channel, I pass it on to you. So if you think it's appropriate, it would sure help if you passed us on to your closest 10,000 friends and family. But above all, give a helping hand to someone today. It's the best gift to give. It'll make you feel good too.
Don't forget to click like, subscribe, share, or ring the bell buttons on the Original Old Farmer channel. We enjoy reading the comments that you leave, and they do help the channel, so keep them coming. And once again, thank you for watching The Original Old Farmer.
The VFW National Home for Children, providing families of veterans and active duty military opportunities for growth and development in a nurturing community. Please consider a donation to help their children and families. I.C. Rhodes speaking.